Welcome to the Polysec Podcast. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay.
And Stephanie Moreno.
All right, so we're supposed to be talking about prisons, yeah?
Yeah, how significant is the prison issue in the United States?
It's a great question. So according to the Justice Department's Bureau of Justice Statistics, they reported that there were 2 million prisoners in 2002, which made 1 in every 142 U.S. residents. In 2013, it jumped to 2.2 million, or 1 in every 110 adults. And on top of that, there are approximately 4.8 million adults who are also on parole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So to put that into perspective, we have more prisoners than Japan, Australia, Canada, Europe, and South Africa combined.
By prisoners, are we also including the parolees?
No.
Oh,
The
dang.
physical bodies in jail. Yeah, parole is even worse. It's crazy. 4 million people, 4.8 million
This
people.
parole thing, I feel like that might be a whole separate podcast. But I'm just so over parole.
Yeah.
The,
it's like a, here's your 2 strikes.
Yeah.
You better not do anything else.
You get a 10 to 15 year sentence on, we'll just say aggravated burglary. Mm-hmm. You serve 5 because.
You should pick a different thing. Don't say aggravated burglary. That's the scariest thing. It's probably the scariest thing in the world.
I mean, it was a 10 to 15 year sentence.
Okay.
So I was just kind of going, it had to be something big.
Yeah.
All right, we'll say Grand Theft Auto.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, stealing cars. Everybody likes Grand Theft Auto. I think every man deep in his heart wants to steal a car and rob a bank. This is like our 2
Gone
favorite
in 60
things.
seconds style?
Yeah, we want to give it back. I don't think we actually want to take someone's car, but deep down we do.
That's joyriding, and I think that's a smaller sentence if you actually return it.
For real?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. That's good to know.
Because it's still like it's not like they just go, oh well, it's all forgiven because like you just borrowed it. You still have to. You still got to get a punishment for that. What happens when they're in jail?
The people when they're in jail? Mm-hmm. All right, so the biggest fear for every man is being sexually assaulted in prison, and for good reason. So up to 1/3 of inmates report homosexual activity, and up to 1/2 report injecting drug use, which is closely linked to instances of blood-borne diseases. There's also the intergenerational effects. There was a survey in 1996 that surveyed African-American inmates, and almost half said they had another family member who was also incarcerated. So the transition may be one of the most unfortunate paradoxes. They transition from a controlled environment to a low supervision environment, and subsequently they engage in extremely risky behavior. The same people that they were with before, they go back to. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about low socioeconomic environments, drug-filled communities, and then their propensity to gravitate towards women, especially, unfortunately, prostitutes and young females, subsequently passing along the HIV, herpes, gonorrhea, and syphilis that they got in jail.
Lack of education, lack of self-esteem, in my opinion.
Lack of a traditional family model, which is like a point for conservatives.
Traditional family, I don't like that though, because the traditional family model, what is that, like mom, dad, brother, sister, and a dog named
a Labrador. Yeah, Labrador.
Okay, well, that's stupid. Yeah. Because like how many traditional family systems do we have, and how many of those family systems are highly dysfunctional versus the single parent or the adoptive parent or the homosexual 2-parent household, but they don't consider that a traditional family environment.
No, but I think that we're transitioning into that being considered a traditional family, just like the step parent is also going to be considered a traditional family.
Yeah,
I think
not though yet.
No, the larger issue though is the single parent household, because they are disproportionately more likely to end up in jail. Yeah, if you lose those few years in between the traditional family model and the single family model, let's put that simply. So you are a female, you have a child with a person who is going to help you raise that child. You're not married because obviously in today's America, you're probably not going to be married. But you have this child, and that first dad, he's out of there, right? So those years between that child being born and the next father stepping in are formative years. They're very important years, and still you took a giant step back as far as their development, as far as the likelihood that they will go to college, the
financial
likelihood
stability.
that financial stability, just little things are messed
I'm
up.
with you.
Just think of the, like if you have 2 parents who are professors, the likelihood that that child will go to a university is sky high. Now, if you only have 1 parent, that's half of the economic prosperity that a 2-parent household would have on average, possibly even less. But we're getting into a gray area. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you have a traditional family, you're less likely to have your kid go to jail.
So if they survive the transition, what emotional things do they go through?
Oh, okay. So I found this really cool thing. It's called gate fever. You ever heard of this?
No.
So it's a syndrome defined by anxiety and irritability at the time of the prisoner's release. They are desperate to reestablish family ties. They are desperate to find employment, and they have trouble managing finances once they return to their community. That's according to a article by Bonholm and Braithwaite, I believe.
Those are good names.
Yeah, strong names. So they saw that the prisoners have what is essentially a psychological syndrome when they come out of jail. They are extra on edge because of it. So the rehabilitation process and perhaps a huge portion of the recidivism may be attributed to a failed transition process.
I'm sorry. I'm in my head thinking about the Shawshank Redemption.
Mm-hmm.
That the way they depicted the institutionalization in that movie, I think is probably one of the more profound insights into what happens with the long-term prison sentences. They just don't seem very productive in the sense that, like, you take a person, you lock them away like an animal for umpteen thousand years, and then you say, okay, later, into this entirely new world. The old guy that got released, he was put in prison before there were cars, phones, cell phones, computers, and they just throw him back out into the wolves.
I think it's a facile argument to say that, he was in jail for so long, like, now he's going to have problems. Apparently, it can happen, like, super early on. Like, he was in prison for a year. Now he's, like, off. He's thrown off. Imagine if someone said, you can't leave your house for a year. You can't communicate with the outside world for a year, for an entire year. We'll take care of you for 1 year, and then good luck going back out. And by the way, when you go out, people aren't going to want to hire you. Your family has moved on. The things that you had before, they're gone. Yeah. So it's like you trying to reestablish your connection to the world. In the meantime, you're still trying to survive. And by the way,
with very few resources.
And in a community that crime is everywhere.
And it looks like the easiest way to get back into the swing of things. Like, you need fast money so that you can help your family out, and then that's the only string to grasp at.
I grew up in around the 80s, right, around in Marcy Projects in Brooklyn, which is really tough neighborhood. And that was like, for the first time, we had the whole neighborhood got hit with a big crack epidemic. No one had never seen anything like this. And so I grew up in the middle of a time where there were young guys, 15, 16 years old, with Uzi machine guns in the project. So imagine this, like, normal day, kids outside playing double dutch and ice cream truck going by, and then guys come running by shooting. Like, that would happen in my projects, So, it forces you to grow up really fast, and it's kind of sad because it robs you of your innocence.
So is this an African-American issue?
Okay, so it isn't exclusively to the Black community, but it is disproportionately affecting the Black community. African-Americans constitute 13% of all monthly drug users. They represent 35% of arrests for drug possessions, 55% of convictions, and 74% of prison sentences. And that's according to an article by Maurer and Hewling in 1995. So they only constitute 13% of the actual drug uses, but 74% of the ones thrown into prison.
So are we talking like trafficking violations and
just more likely
possession?
To be caught. They're just more
could that have to do with the neighborhood? Like, obviously there's higher patrolling area, like in lower income neighborhoods, which are also populated by predominantly Black communities. So that contributes to them being more likely to be caught.
If they're in an area that is higher in crime, they have a higher crime rate, there's more likely to be cops there. There are going to be more police officers patrolling, and you're more likely to be caught if you're doing a crime outside. You're also more likely to do it outside. When you compare African Americans to Caucasians, African Americans are much more likely to commit a crime outside. They are much more likely to smoke weed outside or in their car versus the Caucasian, who is more likely to do it in their house. So you're more likely to be caught. That's in addition to there being more police out there who are doing things like stopping and frisking and stuff like that. In the Federal Bureau of Prison Institutes, their study, they show that approximately 98% of prisoners are male and 38% of them are Black.
Wow.
Yeah, so let that sink in. Yeah.
Whoa. So 98%, you said, okay, so 98% of the prisoners are male of any race.
Yeah, of all the races.
38% of that 98% are Black.
Mm-hmm.
That's nuts.
There's a giant prison population of African Americans. There are actually more African Americans in jail right now than there were slaves at the height of the slave trade. So that was part 1 of the podcast. Again, you can go to polysci.org and see all of the shows that we did. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay.
And Stephanie Moreno.